recording. Okay, so we'll do quick introductions. So Linda and Carol, would you introduce CGCC? I think everybody knows, but just in case.
Sure. My name is Linda Zaneski. I'm the treasurer, and Carol Jones is the president. We're on the board of Chicago Gifted Community Center, and Irene graciously lets us partner with her on this, on these series of parent talks. So we appreciate it. We appreciate everyone's support, especially during COVID. We're trying to do more in-person things now because everybody is actually demanding it. So we have a dinner next week in the Chicago area. We have kids board game club, and we have picnic coming up in June. So hopefully we'll get back into meeting in person again, as well as having some of our online talks.
Oh,
did I miss anything, Carol?
Does that mean
no, ditto what Linda said. So thank you. She covered everything great.
So
sorry, Irene, go ahead.
No, I apologize. Thank you, ladies. So does that mean that the next one could be in person, and like we could do a hybrid, like in person and then do
yeah, it's up to you guys, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Okay, well, great. That'll be so fun. We can't wait to do in-person stuff with everybody too. So we're so done with the Zoom. Okay, and so I'm Irene Gottlieb. I am the head of school at Midwest Academy and chair of the board, and it's a we're grateful that the CGCC is willing to partner with us for I think this is our third year of talks. And also I wanted to introduce Jessica Brown McBroom and thank her for giving us this amazing talk. Take it away, Jessica.
Hey, thank you guys so much for coming tonight. Really excited to talk about ADHD. It's a topic that is very close to my heart, as we will talk more about. And here is our introduction. So, okay, sorry, I'm going to get rid of, I probably will not be able to see chat questions until the end. So go ahead and write them in the chat. I just probably won't be able to see them. Anyway, tonight's presentation, Understanding ADHD and Executive Functioning in Children and Teens. It's quite a lengthy title, Tips and Tools for Understanding and Parenting Children with ADHD and Executive Functioning Deficits. So this presentation is both a combination of ADHD and executive functioning focus, because both of them, you can't ignore the other. And executive functioning tends to be more of an abstract term. Many people have questions as to, like, many people think it's just organization, but it's not. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about that. My name is Jessica Brown McBroom. I'm a child and family therapist. I've been in practice for about 15 years, and I'm the owner of Gifted Key Counseling. Like I had mentioned, this topic is very close to my heart because I myself am ADHD. I was diagnosed in 1988, back when they were just really discovering the diagnosis. And at this point, nobody really, there weren't 504 plans, there wasn't a whole lot of knowledge about it in the field. And I was extremely lucky to have a teacher for a mom who was able to assemble for me an entire support team that followed me all the way through college. And looking back, I know that there is no way I would have gotten to where I am at without that support team. And so I have felt very much called to work with twice exceptional kiddos and ADHD kiddos and really try to help them. Because I feel as though I'm a living example. And, you know, there have been times when my mother herself would come to presentations and no one would believe the struggles that we had until she attended the presentations and started telling everybody what a difficult child I was, and everyone was astounded. So I have a special empathy for kiddos who are in the midst of this struggle. Okay. These are three individuals that I'm relying heavily on in information for tonight. Feel free to check them out. Sarah Ward, many of you are probably familiar with her, speech language pathologist out on the East Coast. Russell Barkley, who is kind of the guru of ADHD, and George McCloskey, who is very experienced in executive functioning. So our outline tonight, we'll see how things go. You'll find I have a lot of slides tonight, but I plan on only covering about 2/3 of the slides if we get through that. The rest you can really delve into on your own, and they're pretty straightforward. So first of all, we're going to talk about ADHD. We're going to define it. What is it? We're going to talk about its relationship with executive functioning, and then we're going to focus on how this plays itself out in everyday life. And I believe this is especially important because for ADHD to really intervene the most effectively with the child themselves is to be able to intervene in the moment when the struggle is happening. And so you have to be able to recognize that in everyday life. Then we're going to talk about interventions. We're going to talk about medication in a more of a generic terms, pros and cons, the diet, recommended diet for ADHD, building time awareness, and that includes transitioning and communication, as well as setting boundaries in the home. And we're going to touch on how learning in non-neurotypical brains is different than in neurotypical brains, and how this impacts parenting, managing meltdowns, and then setting limits with screen time, because those seem to be two very common issues. So what does it look like? Right now, there are two different types of symptoms: inattentive symptoms and hyperactive impulsive symptoms. And if you're the lucky person, such as myself, you have a combined type, which is a combination of both. And you can have primarily inattentive or primarily hyperactive, impulsive, or combined. So just running through quickly the inattentive symptoms. These are some examples: fails to give close attention to details, difficulty sustaining attention, does not seem to listen, doesn't follow through on instructions, difficulty organizing tasks or activity, avoids tasks that require significant mental effort, loses things necessary for tasks, easily distracted, forgetful in daily activities. And then for the hyperactive impulsive, we have fidgets with hands or feet, squirms in seat, leaves seat in classroom, so their bodies are very busy, runs about or climbs successfully, has difficulty playing quietly. They have a lot of difficulty self-regulating. And so these are the kiddos that are constantly going to be moving and making noise. Talks successfully, blurts out answers before questions are completed, has difficulty waiting turns, and interrupts or intrudes on others. So like I said, many of you are probably already familiar. Now, so many of us, when we're first learning about ADHD, can easily read through that checklist and say to ourselves, well, isn't this childhood? And you would be correct. Many of these are symptoms that all of us have shown at any time in our life. And the difference with ADHD is the impairment. These symptoms exist to a place where there is a handicap or suffering at school, at home, and or socially. When we're looking at where does it come from, in simplest terms, brain plus environment equals ADHD. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we know that ADHD is inherited, and it's the result of differences in brain chemistry. So there is a gene for ADHD. It's also tied, there's a lot of overlap with spectrum as well as bipolar in terms of the family genetic pool. But we have specified that there is a gene related to ADHD. So this provide challenges for kiddos in everyday life, including self-soothing, self-control, focusing, prioritization, organization, and balancing. Now, ADHD characteristics may not become a problem until an individual struggles to meet life's expectations. And this is where you can have the genetic component and you can have the vulnerability for ADHD, but not meet the criteria for ADHD itself. And I see this very often in gifted folks, that they have found coping strategies and they've used their intelligence to compensate for some of the inefficiencies that they have. and they are able to maintain a relatively stable life. However, it can be activated at various times. Very common times that I tend to see it is when there's kind of a developmental leap expected. So from 5th to 6th grade, from middle school to high school. I had one particular client that made it through all of her formal schooling with little to no issue, but then went to med school. And all of a sudden that pushed her to the place where she was meeting the criteria for ADHD. So thus we can say that ADHD can be present at any age and can emerge at any time. One of the questions too is, can you outgrow ADHD? So that is a difficult question to answer because for some folks, yes, they are. Now, ADHD doesn't totally ever disappear. But it is true that the brain continues to develop into the early 30s. So you can see a decreasing of the symptoms over time. And each individual is different. So some of my ADHD folks no longer meet the criteria for ADHD when they were in childhood because they have gone into fields or careers, or they've built a life around themselves that they are no longer experiencing impairment. So now we're going to talk a little bit about ADHD and executive functioning. So executive functioning, what is it? So these are the 3 Ps of executive functioning. First of all, it's involved in predicting outcomes. Oftentimes this is all very subconscious, very fast. You're really not even aware that you're doing it. But you're accessing data from the past in order to predict the future. Executive functioning is also involved in planning strategies to achieve an outcome and process progression. So there's a manager part of executive functioning that is constantly going through and asking, how are we doing on this task? What is working? What is not working? Do we need to adapt and create a new done time? Do we need to shift things up? So that is executive functioning. All of this leads to goal completion, whether it would be something as small as going into the kitchen to get a sandwich, all the way to applying for college. It uses the same pieces of the brain. So this goes into a little bit more detail in terms of predicting the outcomes. We're going to talk more. This involves the ability to read the room for cues to predict the environment, as well as recall past experiences and use this information to choose a desired outcome. Again, a very fast process. The planning the strategies is the ability to generate a plan or a roadmap. So you're problem solving now. So I have my destination of where I want to go, but how do I organize the steps to get there? And then, like I had mentioned before, we have the manager that's always analyzing the efficiency of the task. So why is it important, executive functioning? Well, it plays a role in every single mental illness. It plays a role in every single learning disorder. And executive functioning skill deficits have the potential to hinder long-term success throughout the lifetime. I would say it's one of the things that is very much tied to success. And when we have struggles, there's a risk for significant impairment. So I always like to use the weird example that if a person was a house, executive functioning would be the foundation of that house that everything builds itself off of. With each individual brick representing a series of mini tasks that the brain goes through that tie together those 3 Ps that we were talking about. So this is George McCloskey's model, and he's put it in several different modules. So you can see attention, memory, inquiry, optimization, solution, etc. So all individuals with ADHD have impairments in the attention module, perceive, focus, maintain attention, as well as in the impulse or the engagement. So here's where we see the impulse, initiate, the flexibility, the shifting. But every brain is different. And you can have impairments in these other areas and not meet the criteria for ADHD. It comes out in different ways. And that's where executive functioning can get confusing. So with executive functioning being the foundation, the first story would then be the ability to pay attention, to delay gratification, to focus, to regulate your emotions and control your impulses. With the second story then being higher level tasks built upon the first story, planning, time management, prioritization, organization, with all of these things ending at the highest level tasks, abstract reasoning, reading, social skills, writing, conflict resolution, etc. One of the things that, sorry about this, I don't have my presenter view, so I can't see ahead. One of the things that I tend to see most often is that individuals make an attempt to try to intervene at these higher levels without addressing the foundation area. And of course, when we have holes in this foundation, we are going to see problems here. But if you try to come in and let's say teach your child how to use a day timer, but they have no ability to feel time or predict time or shift between activities, no matter how well you present that strategy, it's not going to be able to stick or be performed independently without really going back to the basics. And this is kind of what I focus on in my practice, is bringing the brain back and rebuilding some of these foundational bricks. So in the old days, we used to think that all executive functioning was located in the frontal lobe, right here, which is the highest level of the brain. But it's not. It utilizes many parts of the brain. And the way I like to describe it is as though it is railroad tracks through the brain, with the train station being the frontal lobe that sends out the trains throughout the brain when executive functioning is activated. When we have one of those missing bricks, what happens is it shuts off communication to these areas of the brain, which is enormously frustrating because the brain has the capacity to perform these tasks, but these areas are just not being lit up. Now, this is why the one thing that will override this blockage is dopamine. So this is why you will see your child focus and follow through with a task when dopamine is associated. So video games, special interest, things they are passionate about, that kind of pushes the train through and lightens up all these different areas. So this battle, you will constantly see it during transitions, during low stimulus tasks that require multiple steps, long-term projects, cleaning chores, tests, prepping for college, pretty much anything that requires focus and dedication that isn't going to provide a short-term burst or reward. So let's talk a little bit about what it looks like in everyday life. So the two things we're going to focus on is time miming, something I refer to as time miming, kind of borrowed that phrase from Sarah Ward. And the second one is reading the room. So let's talk about what time miming is. Okay, so let's say we have a kiddo with very strong executive functioning skills, and this is Rob. So Rob has just gotten off the bus and he is walking home from school. So what is his mind doing? First of all, it's anticipating future feelings, right? Because it's predicting or it's processing the past information and anticipating. So he's saying, now this is oftentimes very subconscious. It happens so fast, but he's saying, wow, and I remember I felt really frustrated that last time I procrastinated doing my homework and I had to do it early the next morning. So let's not do that. In the present, he's assessing where his tank is. I'm feeling pretty motivated to get my stuff done. And then he's anticipating the future reward for getting his stuff done. I will feel so much better after my homework is done. I think I'll play Minecraft before dinner. So the second stage of time miming is now implementing the plan. So now he starts to plan. Now, again, he's accessing past information. My teacher said today that it will take about 10 minutes per math problem. Kyle said we needed to schedule time to work on our project soon. And today is Thursday. I need to collect the garbage like I do every Thursday. He's thinking of the present. I'm assessing my body right now. I'm hungry. I should plan in a snack first. Now we go into planning. I'll eat a snack first. Since I have chores to do, I'll empty the trash. Then I'll start on my math homework. After that, I'll text Kyle to schedule time to do our project. And finally, I think I'll play Minecraft until dinner. Beautiful movie scene he has right now with each thing well organized. Now let's say we have Bob. And Bob is also on his way home from school, has just left the bus and is walking home, but he does not have good executive functioning skills. Let's say that he is untreated ADHD. So when he's accessing the past, we have nothing, absolutely nothing. There is no past, there is nothing but right now. Or we are accessing the most stimulating thing in past. So we're thinking about the movie we watched at lunch or the dessert that we had, and that's super exciting. So again, we're thinking dopamine right here, anything that creates dopamine. In the future, sorry about the loud cricket noise, we also have nothing because there is no future. So why do I need to worry about it? Or everything else disappears and we are focusing on the most stimulating thing in the future. So I am getting home. The only thing in my brain right now, I am getting home to play video games. That is my sole purpose. There is nothing else. School is over. Now we have video games. Now in the present, we have all sorts of things. Look, a squirrel. I'm hungry. Do you think there are cookies left? I have to go to the bathroom. Like plenty of bombardment of input of information in the present, but without the ability to access the past and the future, no planning can occur. So no time miming occurs. And now when you think about both of these boys walking through the door, you can imagine what different scenarios you are going to have. He's got a great plan. He's not going to require a whole lot of direction. This guy has a plan and it's going to go against everything that he should be doing, and trying to get him off of his highly dopamine stimulated plan of playing Minecraft is going to be a fight. And this is probably something very common for many parents and educators listening to me right now, is that it is a struggle to try to get your kiddo into planning mode when they haven't done any of it when they should have been doing it, if that makes sense. So that is time miming. So it continues into development. It involves visual anticipation. So you can see that it starts with now and moves all the way to where it kind of peaks, 35 years old, 3 to 5 weeks. What I find interesting is 17 to 23 years old, again, only able to really feel, anticipate, and visualize 2 to 3 weeks. And you think about all the things we ask 17 and 18-year-olds to do in terms of monitoring their grades, anticipating the future with college, even when that's not really going to matter now. When we have impairment there, that's going to be a big struggle. So having a support system during these years, especially important. If you have an ADHD diagnosis, you can subtract a 1/3 developmental delay. In fact, I encourage all individuals who have kiddos with ADHD to get into the habit when they are trying to assess and intervene with their kiddo to intervene at the developmental age as opposed to the chronological age. It has nothing to do with intelligence. But for instance, and this is probably going to scare a lot of people, if your child is ADHD and is 16 years old, you need to understand that we're working at about 11 or 12 when it comes to impulse control, anticipating consequences, learning from consequences. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the struggle of trying to intervene with kids at this age, but that's just something for you to be aware of. And I found that's been very helpful in parents to be able to separate what portion of the behaviors they're seeing are actual behaviors, because it's a behavior problem versus what portion is a manifestation of having ADHD. So the next thing we're going to talk about is reading the room, which is the next big skill. So executive functioning plays a huge role in our brain's ability to pause, interpret, and adapt to visual cues from our environment. So back to our friend Rob. Let's say that he has walked in to the classroom. He's 5 minutes late. He immediately starts scanning the environment. What time is it? What do we usually do at this time every day? Oh, it looks like they have their books out and are reading. I should get mine out too. Chance looks busy. I'll wait to talk about his baseball game until after class. Is the chapter everyone is reading written on the board? Oh, there's the homework pile on the teacher's desk. I'll make sure to put my homework there before I leave. So now, however, when we look at Mr. Bob, who may be coming into the room, he marches in immediately, sits down at desk. Hey, Chance, did you win your game? Begins doodling. Does not notice that books are out, the homework pile, and the clock. So consequences of this, he interrupts and irritates a peer. He's not following the teacher's instructions. He may cause interruption of the teacher, and he misses valuable information and forgets to turn in homework. This is such a common issue I hear over and over again with parents, the turning in homework. And this is exactly what happens with so many ADHD kids. They have the homework completed, but there isn't natural attention drawn to where it's supposed to be turned in. And so it doesn't exist. And that's why you're approaching them. The teacher told me you didn't turn in your homework. Why didn't you turn in? I forgot. How could you forget? You completed it. This is how you forget. In the home, that's what it can look like. A lot of chaos, a lot of struggles, because again, we don't have that executive functioning piece that helps smooth the way in so many scenarios. So there's still hope. The executive brain functions continue to develop well into the mid-20s, and some would say even now, early 30s. However, I will say after that, from preaching to the choir, I'm sure it's all downhill from there. then you have a gradual decrease until you're elderly and develop memory issues. But also research shows that executive functioning is adaptable. Those missing bricks that I was talking about, that's the very exciting, cool thing, is that if you can isolate and identify where those impairments are, you can introduce to the brain new strategies, and then it's amazing because you will see it resonate throughout that entire house module all the way up to the top. So that was just kind of a brief description of what's going on in the brain and what ADHD can look like in everyday life. So hopefully that can be helpful in just understanding. Now we're going to talk a little bit about interventions. So the goal of these interventions are twofold: to assist the child's ability to function more effectively at home and at school, and this one's especially important, to eventually train the child's brain to perform functions independently. So many of my kiddos and their parents are their functioning frontal lobes, and they can do it, but it causes an enormous strain and stress. And it's also very difficult on the parenting relationship, because not only do you have to be a parent, but you also have to be the personal assistant, constantly managing your kiddo. So my interventions that I talk about today are time consuming, but they pay off big time in the long run. So first, let's talk about medication. And we're gonna only briefly kind of touch on this because it is such a important issue, but intervening with meds. So research shows that medication is the most effective treatment in decreasing symptoms of ADHD, which is not necessarily the most effective treatment of ADHD, but when it comes to decreasing those symptoms, you're going to see the fastest improvement. Stimulants are the most common medications used, but recently more non-stimulant medications are also being used. Many people ask, why in the world would you give a hyperactive child a stimulant? And that is a good question. That is because the stimulants stimulate the production of dopamine, which we have a disruption in dopamine. We have a decrease in dopamine, and we don't create it the way that we need to. And the stimulants create the dopamine, which then leads to self-regulation. So we are able to access those skills of calming down a lot faster on stimulants. So medication must be prescribed by a medical doctor or a psychiatrist, or a medical doctor who specializes in medicine for emotional brain issues. Psychiatrists tend to be a lot harder to get into, but it's always my first choice that you would see a psychiatrist over a primary. And the only reason why I say that is because oftentimes kiddos, as they age into later adolescence and early adulthood, often develop comorbid diagnoses of depression, anxiety, sometimes even OCD. Not everybody, but it is very common, and it's helpful to have a doctor that specializes in, blending those medications together and managing the side effects. However, I also want to say I have had some amazing relationships with some primary care docs that are very well informed. So that's not to say that you cannot get very good assistance from your primary as well. So some issues to consider. First of all, your beliefs and values. It is not an easy thing to think about medicating your child, especially their brain and their personality. It's a very important decision, and some people are not comfortable with that. And that is very important to listen to. Secondly, and I would say this is one of the most important things to consider, your child's inherent need to experience their own success and the long-term effects emotionally when this need is not met. This is usually, and I've seen this case when kiddos will come to me in maybe freshman year of high school, and I see them and their light is already gone. They no longer have any vision of themselves being successful in a classroom. They have tuned out, and it's not impossible to help. In fact, there's a lot that we can do, but it takes a lot longer of a time. And that's because this child is tired of trying, and they haven't been able to have the tools to succeed. And so they've created an image in their mind of just an ineffective student. You also want to take a good look at your child's current support system and the limitations of that support system. So what are your emotional, physical, financial limitations in implementing alternative treatments effectively versus commonly recommended treatments? You also want to make sure you're getting the right information. There's a lot of information out there specifically about stimulants, and you want to look for empirically validated studies, which are studies that have been vetted by other researchers and validated in multiple settings, as well as from a medical doctor, a trained neurologist, or psychiatrist. And in addition, you want to consider the dealing with side effects, because they do exist. Appetite suppression, anxiety, shakiness, and you have to constantly be comparing the impairment that can happen with these versus some of these other things, as well as the mental straitjacket. I myself have been on medication for a very long time, and I have learned when I'm on it, I do sacrifice parts of myself. The more creative, kind of take it as it goes part, the kind of goofier part, it doesn't go away, but it does get muted while under the influence of medication. And for some individuals, that is a big no-no, and they do not enjoy that feeling. And in that case, medication may not be the right option. Now we're going to talk a little bit about diet. So these are the top 7 nutrients essential for neurotransmitter balance, and you can look them over here. This is where you just being able to access these slides is probably going to be way more helpful than me going through and telling you, each one of these. But these are examples of foods that meet each one of these criteria, and trying to implement them into your child's diet will be very, very helpful. This chart has all of those neurotransmitters. Love this chart. Has the amino acids and the nutrients, as well as the botanicals, so the herbal supplements that can help, and the foods. It's a long story why LSD and marijuana is on this chart. I did not create it. It was created by somebody who works with trauma patients and also was doing studies on the benefits of entheogens. So just ignore that column. I am not, suggesting marijuana and LSD to treat your child's ADHD. Here are the serotonin, the amino acids, the botanicals, and the foods, as well as dopamine. And those two, I would say serotonin and dopamine are the two that you really want to focus on. Serotonin is like the baseline that regulates mood and sleep and diet. And I will say that when serotonin is dysregulated, it's very difficult to get any executive functioning going. So those two, making sure that you have those two covered, probably the most important. But you can go over these again after the presentation. So next, managing time. So this is an intervention that might take you time to do, and it'd be very easy for you to say, oh, that's something that lady talked about at this presentation, but it's not something I would ever do. Understand that, but I would challenge that, because the next couple interventions are going to save you a massive amount of time over the future. So slices of time, this is more for younger children. When they're still motivated and they think you're cool when you come up with good ideas to help them, right? Until adolescence, and then none of this will work. Have your child draw a circle, divide it into the slices of time, and cut the pieces out. Funny story, I went through a presentation and had my little diagram, and someone told me, Jessica, that adds up to 65 minutes. So I had to go back to redo the circle. And I said, this is a great example of ADHD in practice right here. Anyway, this one we made sure is actually accurate to an hour. So before your child begins any task, have them take the estimated slices of time they believe the task will take. This is so helpful because it gets them start in the habit of starting to estimate time before the task, and then you can turn into a game. After the task is completed, make sure to ask your child to note if their estimate was correct. You can also model by doing the same thing for your tasks and remarking on times you over or underestimate. Younger kids, again, this is great, because what this leads to is that your children start to get into a habit before homework of anticipating and predicting that time. They also have an ability to feel what that time feels like, and they're more likely to integrate that and build those kind of foundation bricks. So for older children, love the analog clocks. Why? Because there's a visual progression of time. The more of these guys you have around the house, the better. You'll find, if you talk with anybody who works with me, one of my first recommendations is to have clocks readily available, especially in a study space, and constantly part of the family discussion. You are no longer the determiner of the time. You're not the culprit, the clock is. What time does the clock say? What do we usually do at this time? This draws your child's attention to the clock as opposed to you being their clock. And it's also easier for you to say, it's not my fault, it's the clock's fault, when they don't want to do something that you're trying to remind them to do. You can buy clock stands on Amazon. And I have a transportable one that I take with me, and it's big and it's obnoxious, but it gets my attention and it works. I like the plastic case ones because sometimes we will shade before a task, and we'll do a little mark of, okay, you think this is going to take 45 minutes, so you're going to put a little mark here, and we're going to shade the time period. And then what happens is you have the clock right there, your child's eyes are drawn to the hand in the progression of time, and once again they're able to feel it. So this is just going over kind of the estimated amount of time. Studies have shown that the actual shading and the motor movement internalizes the skill all the more. So again, probably in real life, an irritating task that you will get a lot of eye rolls and probably some arguments, especially from our feistier ones. But in the long run, if you stick with it, it's going to save you a lot of time in battles. These are some examples of some things I used in treatment by finding some creative ways to visualize time. So I had a client who was chronically late to session. She was a young adult and she hated it. She was so, there was so much shame because she could never get there on time. So we talked about, well, what motivates you? And her answer was pizza. And I'm like, well, that's a universal. And so what we decided to do is we created a pizza chart. And every time she was able to, we started with, I think, at least 20 minutes after the session started, she earned a pizza piece. And then when she got full pizza, we'd order a pizza and we'd have it. This worked like a charm. It took maybe 2 or 3 months before she was totally on time. And she explained to me the process. When she'd think about coming to session, what happened is the first thing that jumped in her mind was the pizza. So all of a sudden, then we're thinking about the backpack. We're thinking about the time that I have to gather my things and I need to make sure my shoes are on. But it all started with that visual representation of the pizza. This is one of my clients, we call it a snack map. She had a long drive ahead and had a lot of difficulty self-regulating. So what we did is we went through and we had her fill out, you know, where she's going to be on the map and where the snack was, and then planning in her different activities. So again, just some different examples. This is another one of my clients who had her son kind of fill out something like this at the beginning of the day. So first day reminders, what you need to do, today's schedule, and then she had him kind of draw a timeline of what those events were. And that, again, helped him have that timeline picture of his day. So let's talk about managing daily transitions. For children who have not yet mastered time miming, images work way better at teaching the brain to master this skill independently. And I'm talking actual images of your child's coat, of your child's bathroom routine. This is what you want to do because you want the brain to be able to, just like I was talking about with my client with the pizza, to access those visual images, because those visual images override everything else in the brain. And that is like our sneaky shortcut for building that independence and build executive functioning through those actual relevant images. So for mornings, this is another one that's going to take some time, but you take a picture of your kiddo on her way out the door with everything in her hands that she needs. And then you print out the picture and you have her circle what the different objects are. So we have keys, phone, homework, and lunch. I have a Polaroid printer as well as a Polaroid camera that I can easily print out things. It's a great investment. And I have a laminator, 2 things that are phenomenal for creating effective visual interventions that stick. So you can do this, print it out, and then put it on a backpack tag. To create better independence, you can take 2 pictures of your child, and this is all very specific in terms of having your kiddo walk through time, one in front of the door empty-handed and one complete with everything she needs. And you ask her, how is this picture different than this picture? And encourage her to identify to you each of the details. So now she is the one using the scanning the environment executive functioning skill to pick out what she needs to do, as opposed to you asking, do you have your lunch? Do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? Now, when you're asking questions like that, it's true that you're helping her make sure that she remembers what she needs to do, but you are also enlisting yourself into a constant battle of reminders, which I'm sure you don't want to do eternally with your kiddo, because that's very frustrating. So the next step, ask your child to go find all the items in the house that she will need in her bag before school. Have her lay them out next to her bag and take a picture. And this works for all sorts of routines. This is how you can effectively help your child develop that time miming skill. And I will say, hands down, when parents have taken the time to do this, it usually takes about 2 weeks before there's complete independence. So these techniques work with most everything. Sure, you can find these visual charts, but they're not nearly as effective, because when your child looks at these, they're like, I don't have clothes like that. This has nothing to do with me. Who's that kid? I mean, that's what the brain does in a millisecond. And I know, because I have ADHD. Whereas if you take the real pictures, there's much more pull of, I know what that is. That's mine. This is the time when I use that's mine. At what's mine, and I know where it is in the house. And of course, you can use the time miming and the clocks. So those, if I had to pick 2 most straightforward interventions that you can do, outside of a therapy setting, those would be it. In addition, we want to talk about ways to communicate with your child that encourage independence. So you want to try to avoid telling your child what to do. Instead, make observations that draw your child's attention to the current environment and what should be happening next, because you don't want to have to be your child's frontal lobe forever. So these are examples of independent questions versus dependent questions. So for example, have you done your homework yet? Would be a dependent question. Instead, you can say something like, it looks like you're playing video games. What must you have already finished? Instead of, did you remember to get your lunch? It looks like there might be something missing from your backpack. And if you have that picture already, that's going to be a really easy identify. Get your gym bag packed and ready to go. So now instead, you're drawing attention to the clock. If it's 4 o'clock right now, what should you start doing? Bring your dishes to the sink. If you've completed your dinner, then what are you expected to do next? You get the gist here. This one, though, is especially important because transition's so hard. Stop watching TV, it's time to leave. Instead, asking them to cue into the environment. If your sister is putting her coat and shoes on right now, then what is it almost time for us to do? And what should you be doing? That's going to cue them into the environment. It's difficult to kind of shift to remember to do this, but once you do, it really does make sense. Many of my kiddos do get irritated because they're like, why are you asking me that? Because we want your brain to learn. But yeah, this can be very effective. Encourage your child to think backwards by asking them to draw out or describe the finished task or product. Why is this? By having them do the finished product, because it gives a push of dopamine. Usually for those of us with ADHD, if it is a task that, let's see for myself, if it's a task that requires multiple steps, that I have to have my body in different rooms or different places, gather objects, and then implement the task. When somebody tells me to do that task, always, the first thing is my brain just kind of shouts out no and wants to run away. I don't know. Well, I do know why. It's because that kind of scenario just, it's overwhelming because we don't have that ability to time mine and kind of picture ourselves. That takes practice for us to do that. But if you ask us to describe that finished product, that's dopamine flow, and that's much more likely to push us in and decrease some of that anxiety. So you ask, how will your room look different than it does now once you've finished cleaning it? And what will your assignment notebook look like once I look at it this afternoon? What will, and of course, a good old clock question. What will the clock look like when it's time for us to go? So, and I know I'm moving pretty fast, but I have a lot of information, and I know we're under the burden of time. Boundaries. Why are we talking about boundaries? Because those of us with ADHD do not have the internal regulation system to keep things organized, to keep ourselves on track. And that means we're going to require a lot more structure from our environments to give us those cues, because we don't naturally do those ourselves. So one of the examples I like to use for the way you want to think about setting effective boundaries with children and teens with ADHD. They used to have these in the 80s, and they took them off the market because they were unsafe, as you can see, I'm sure. But these were expandable fences. We used to have one where it could go all the way in, very small space, and then you could bring it out to the entire yard. And we would just be put in there as toddlers, my sister and I, for long periods of time because it was the 80s. Anyway, this is how I think about parenting these kids, is that they will let you know where they need the fences to be based on how they manage the space. So you want to start small. So for instance, okay, you want to play screens before homework. I'll give you 5 to 10 minutes to play screens before homework. If kiddo is very successful, homework is completed, and they're able to do that transition, well, okay, let's expand the boundaries a little bit more. If you want to get some of your after homework screen time and do it before, we can try that, and we'll see how you do with that. Same thing with, driving the car, curfew. Okay, this is the curfew. If you show us that you can get here on time, that's going to allow us to keep those fences where they are at. But if you can't, we bring them in. Now, the important thing with the flexible fences is that it provides hope, because it's never permanent. So your kiddo doesn't feel like it's a slap in the face and, oh, you failed, now you're getting your privileges removed, never to be back again. You're saying, nope. This just is requiring your focus to focus more on the space that you have here. And then once you master it again, we expand the fences and we see how you do. Great, great analogy, especially through adolescents with ADHD, because our development is kind of delayed. We experience more difficulty with learning and learning from consequences. It takes us longer periods of time to be able to do that. But we still want the same benefits as our peers. And so this is an approach that allows us to do that in a way that's helping us pay attention to our own behaviors. I also like to think, being ADHD, if you want to intervene effectively, think about yourself as a chess master. You want to anticipate the moves, 4 to 5 moves ahead. Why is that? We don't mean to be, but we can be tremendously manipulative in the moment. And because we experience emotions so intensely, and we are in that now and not now time frame, if we don't like something that you're asking us to do, we will pour all of our energy, and we'll talk more about this in terms of boundaries and manipulation, but we will pour all of our energy, all of our resources, all of our intelligence into the intensity of that moment and taking control of it. And that requires you to be able to step outside of the chaotic mess that's going on with us right now and how we want to feel back in control, and be able to react calmly and offer us choices so we can come back into our body and our brain and make an educated choice. So I want to talk and touch a little bit on learning in neurotypical brains, because this is going to help you plan interventions that are more likely to work and give you a greater understanding of how we work. So in a neurotypical brain, first we have a choice. Should I do my homework like mom says? Then we have a behavior. Nope, gonna keep playing Xbox. Then we have a consequence. I got a bad grade and made mom mad. No more Xbox this week. Then on average, this repeats probably 2 to 3 times for most kids, maybe. Then we have learning. Not doing my homework leads to bad things. Because see, now once again, when we have learning, we're accessing the past information, we're integrating it into the future. So learning in non-neurotypical brains, first, we have no pre-thought. So we have, what homework? There is no homework. I don't have homework. Xbox is awesome, because remember good old Bob and his dopamine-filled plan of wanting to play Minecraft. Then we have the behavior. Does not do homework, obviously. Then we have the consequence. I got a bad grade and made mom mad. No more Xbox this week. Then we get stuck in this loop over and over and over again. And one of the things we are absolutely famous for is making you feel like the villain in this scenario, because we feel like victims. We didn't plan on having that behavior. It just happened. We have no link to our behavioral choice and having ownership over it. So when you come along and you give us a consequence, we are confused, angry, upset, and feel betrayed, and in no way learn the lesson that we were the ones that caused this. This is just something for you to keep in mind as to why you continue to have the same battles over and over with your child. No learning. So how do we intervene effectively in non-neurotypical children? The choice is given by you, preferably as close to the period of time of the choice as possible. And again and again and again, having to do that reminder several different times. So you're saying if you choose not to do your homework today, remember, you're gonna miss out on Xbox. Many parents will say this in the morning. That doesn't always exist, and it doesn't translate to the evening or afternoon. So sometimes you have to say it right before our body's about to go to the Xbox. Then we have the behavior. It's now no longer impulsive, but premeditated. We have the consequence, which is then fully enforced by the parent. For example, no Xbox for the day. Then we have repeats fewer times, because we're constantly, you are not letting us off the hook. You're not putting us in the place of a victim. So we don't get to pull the victim card because this was an educated choice. So now we have learning. When I don't do my homework, bad things happen. When I do, I get to play Xbox. So one of my favorite resources is Parenting with Love and Logic. And later in the presentation, there will be a link that is very helpful, that has some handouts that I strongly recommend you check out. So Parenting with Love and Logic, fantastic for ADHD kids, because it is an in-the-moment parenting strategy that really helps you regain control. So it's 2 choices presented neutrally. You can turn off the computer game now, or you can keep playing it, but not be able to play again for 2 days. Either way is okay with me. Which choice would you like to make? So either way, we have empathy, affirming the response for a good choice. Wow, I bet you'll be glad when you get to play the game again tomorrow. What a great decision. Or neutral response with empathy. Boy, it's too bad that you aren't going to be playing that game for a couple of days. I can see why you're sad about that. Bummer. I wonder if you'll make a different decision next time. So the advantage is that it neutralizes control struggles, builds connection between parent and child through empathy, and it teaches children responsibility and good decision making. Because once again, you're putting it back in their hands, allowing them to slow down, and you're also effectively kind of time miming for them because you're giving visuals of the two choices. This is so easier said than done, and I always feel guilty putting it in there, but it's true. Remember to stay calm and neutral. Now, of course, there's going to be times where you're not going to be able to do that. Just don't expect learning to occur in the same way. Why? Because your child is going to be focusing on your intensity and your emotions, and they will be doing it for you to calm you down. But the next time that it happens, they're not going to necessarily associate their behavior with their own choice. So if you're not calm, that's fine. It just might take a little bit longer. So here are the links. This is, let's see, the parenting with love and logic kind of goes more into detail. Love these questions, guiding choices. It also has, guidance for solving kids' own problems, and a way to communicate with several different control struggles in a way that would follow the love and logic, and with enforceable statements. The second one we'll talk about in just a sec. So next, we're just going to run on managing homework meltdowns. So back to that executive functioning piece, which involves the prefrontal cortex, a part of the frontal lobe. What we know about executive functioning is that there is a reservoir. All of us have it. There's a limited resource pool of effort or willpower that fuels the ongoing processes of executive functioning. One of the greatest difficulties with kids with ADHD is that their reservoir is smaller, much smaller. And it's so common by the time they get home from school that it's already gone, and they have nothing left. So a lot of this means that what we refer to as the subcortex, the fight or flight, the impulse part of the brain is the one running the show, because the executive functioning is exhausted. So here's where we see the emotions come out and little to no ability to time regulate as Mr. Subcortex wins. So in the angry brain, when this is happening, the frontal lobe is shut down. So all of your child's logic, analytical skills, anything having to do with that is not accessible. So basically what's in charge is that oldest part of the brain, the fight or flight, which is just that very basic, on edge, not able to process information. So when you're wanting to look to refill the reservoir, you want to have snacks that contain glucose, cereal, pasta, grains, nuts, 10-minute relaxation breaks, no more than 10 minutes. After that, it gets rough. And I strongly recommend not using screen time as reservoir refilling time. That's going to be what you think about for an ADHD brain. You're basically going to give me like the best thing ever, like chocolate cake, and then you want me to go back and eat some celery and do my homework. That's a really tough sell. So 3-minute meditation breaks, positive rewards. We got to get that dopamine flowing. Positive self-statements. When I will have my kiddos verbalize, I will complete this at 4:30. Just verbalizing it makes a difference. Physical exercise, regular, and practicing EF-friendly activities like board games, crafts, and schoolwork. So interacting during a meltdown, just like I was talking about earlier, when a person is escalated, they can usually only process 1 or 2 words that someone is saying. So try to avoid problem solving during extreme escalation. In other words, don't ask why. Why questions access the logical higher levels of the brain. And oftentimes you're going to get a frustrated response or I don't know, and then it's going to send them more into a spiral because not only are they having a meltdown, but they don't even know why they're having a meltdown. You want to speak calmly, slowly, and softly. Avoid touching. Your job is to slow them down and come back in their body. And you do that by reflecting feelings and pointing out cues. So I can see by your face and your clenched fist that you are super upset right now and are tired of doing homework. You want to stay quiet, let them take that in, and even let them cry for a little bit as you continue to reflect those feelings, because oftentimes they're wanting to be seen and heard. Then you offer reservoir filling solutions once the child has de-escalated from extreme frustration. In certain scenarios, I have kids that have now developed homework avoidance because they cannot get their homework done, and instead it's pure torment watching them at the table, and you can see they have no capacity to do so. That's when I will involve the school and try to get support from them in terms of, listen, can we get a shortened amount to be able to help, at least help the child, invite the child back to the homework table so they feel like it's doable. If behaviors continue to escalate, remember to stay calm, and it's back to love and logic. So if you choose to do this, then this will happen. If you choose to do this, then this will happen. And you want to allow them to make his or her choice. Follow through completely and immediately with action. And of course, check out Parenting with Love and Logic. So this will be our final section, ADHD and screen time. Now, why are we talking about this? And again, I am like total ADHD myself. I am a gamer girl, and gaming is the only time that my brain feels truly at rest. There is so much going on all the time in trying to manage the input and the output. And when it comes to that dopamine flow, the brain is like a perfect match. And this is why you see your child returning to it over and over again, because it's the only time they don't have to work at regulating their behaviors. But, you know, what I will tell to kids is that screen time is like pixie sticks or sugar, pure granulated sugar for the drink, for the brain. Would you have a diet of pure granulated sugar? Probably not. That wouldn't be good for your diet, but it's good for a treat. So some interesting things about technology. We have seen an overall decline in technology over time. And this is interesting because back in the 80s, remember, we had these phones and they had long phone cords, and you have to pull them all the way to the other room of the house to get any privacy from your parents. It's really fun. But on average, we had 7 to 8 different phone numbers that we had in our memory. We were constantly accessing them. That involves sequencing, that involves working memory. We were constantly doing this on an everyday basis. Now, I don't even remember my sister's number. It's 346 something, but I can never remember the last 4 digits because our brain doesn't have to do that kind of task. In addition, I think my generation was kind of the last generation that, you know, you could be released at 9 a.m. in the morning, maybe come back for lunch and show up at 4 p.m. and be just fine. And you would be with kids all day long. And you think about the way that the brain learns and develops through non-directive free play with problem solving and social skills. Like kids teach themselves how to work the problems out, as well as the ability to self-regulate because I'm engaging in imaginative play. Now it's reduced to a lot of video games or structured sports, or structured activities, which have a benefit and are very beneficial for your kiddo, but it still does not develop these same types of skills. And you think about modern day life, screens are everywhere. So it drastically alters the brain. Some of this has been better, some of this has been worse. And the better ways increase connectivity, strategic planning, fine motor skills, and spatial orientation. But down on emotional processing, overall cognitive functioning, the overall ability to pay attention, and gray matter, which has to do with memory. So these are some pretty big downsides of extra screen time. It's also important to recognize that a good, healthy brain that has a good foundation for executive functioning is going to be a well-rested brain. And there is a difference between the types of rejuvenation and the effect it will have on your energy. So zone time is what I call TV, scrolling social media, video games, and YouTube videos. It requires the least amount of energy to engage in, but it also restores the least amount of energy. Whereas recreation time is exercise, meditation, reading, board games, artistic expression, free play, etc. It's the opposite, requires the most amount of energy, but also restores the most amount of energy. I will say for myself, I have found when my brain is particularly exhausted, I will start with some of this and then do some of this, because this kind of helps just bring my brain down. But having a balance of these two things is especially important for children. So when we're thinking about setting limits for screen time, again, as I mentioned earlier, my interventions are very much focused on creating independence for your child so that you don't have to have the same battles over and over again. So you remember, you are the chess master. So before you communicate your boundaries, you must anticipate all the possible outcomes of your actions. Many folks that I try to help, that I do help, have gotten, by the time they're asking for help, screens run the house. And it's kind of the main thing. So you come along and you want to make changes to that, you are not going to be a popular person in your family. So you want to anticipate what that reaction will be. But to decrease the chances of having a fight, before enforcing a significant change in terms of limitations of technology, always communicate your plans well before the date of the enforcement. I recommend at least a week. So it's like, go to town for the next week, but just so you know, starting next week, we are going to have a new plan. Most of the time they'll complain, but you'll get the complaints out then, and then you don't have the combination of having to deal with their meltdowns and implement and enforce the plan. You can at least flush it out in the beginning. So the first thing is that you want to give your child the chance to show that he or she can demonstrate self-control before enforcing the boundary. So you want to anchor the behaviors you are looking for. If you demonstrate to me that you are able to get off screens when I ask, have no difficulty completing your chores and homework, and you do not allow it to interfere with your sleep, I will allow you to keep your devices. This again, you're inviting your child to your team as opposed to being on the opposite team, because you're giving them a way to prove that they can manage the space that they have right now. Tell them what the outcome will be if they fail. If you are not able to demonstrate these behaviors over the next few days, I will be forced to keep your device for you during our no screen time until we can teach you how to use screens responsibly. So you're opening up, the possibility for hope. Anticipate the worst scenario, and if necessary, communicate it. Please know that if you are unable to respect the rules and hand over your device, or if I find you sneaking the device, I will install the software that will be deactivating your phone. But I really hope I don't have to do that, because, and then you're showing faith in your child, because I believe you have the ability to handle this on your own. Provide hope for restoration. If you can demonstrate to me that you are respecting my limitations and balancing your responsibilities, we will try once more to give you freedom. This works like a charm, so much better. I mean, it's never a popular sell to try to limit screens in the household, but I will say that this model of putting in boundaries, you can apply to many different things, not just screens. Anchoring the behaviors, like giving a heads up before you change, because one of the things with those of us with ADHD, we have a real hard time shifting. So we get really set on, if we have video game time at this time, that's what I'm gonna be thinking about all day long. And if you come along and you remove that, again, you're gonna have a big meltdown with probably little to no learning. This is a very fair and adult way to teach them how to gradually use screens independently. And if you are planning times in which your child will not have access to screens, assist them ahead of time in finding alternate activities to do, because if your kids have been using screens, that means they don't really know how to self-regulate, or they haven't done it for a long time. So go over that with them ahead of time, so you're not having to be put in the position of now entertaining your child when you're taking the screens away. So hopefully that is helpful. I just saw a lot of this after COVID. And so I wanted to make sure to touch on that. In conclusion, discover and enjoy the strengths of your child. This is so important. Many of us with ADHD carry what I call the Book of Hurts. And the Book of Hurts is a series of multiple failed interactions that we've had throughout life, because that's what it means to have ADHD. To try and to fail repeatedly, a lot longer and a lot harder than a lot of people. And many of us are very intelligent, very sensitive, and very aware. And we don't see our own strengths. So when you're pulling those out and drawing attention to them, we already know we're broken. Not broken, I guess that's not a good way to say it, but we already know that we struggle in kind of a slightly different way. And we already know that we're not like a lot of other kids, many of us. And when you draw attention to this, it helps us remember. And I will even talk about the superpowers of ADHD, discovering like the overfocus, the super focus that can come with it, and your passion and your creativity. Remember that your child wants to do well and be successful. And above all, forgive yourself. These kiddos are challenging. So many parents that I talk to feel so guilty at how frustrated they are. But they should be frustrated because, again, you're fighting with kind of a little bit of a maturity delay. And so we tend to struggle a lot more on normal milestones. And that is the end of my presentation. So I